I'm Penelope, 31 years old, and I've always been the responsible one in my family. When my grandmother left her vintage apartment, I poured my savings into renovating it. Then at dinner last week, my father casually handed my brother Ryan the keys, saying, "We're giving the apartment to Ryan." I just smiled and said, "Then he can handle the 10K repairs I paid for." Everyone laughed like I'd made a joke. They stopped laughing when the bills started arriving. Where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments, hit subscribe, and stick around to see how I turned this family betrayal into the wake-up call they never expected. My relationship with my family has always been complicated. From the outside, we look picture perfect. Successful father who built his accounting firm from nothing. Mother who managed our household with precision. My younger brother Ryan with his charismatic smile, and me, the reliable daughter with a thriving career in marketing. But beneath that polished family portrait was a lopsided dynamic I had grown to accept without really questioning. My grandmother Elaine was different. She saw me. While my parents were busy cheering at Ryan's football games or making excuses for his C-grade report cards, Grandma Elaine would show up at my debate competitions and hang my academic awards on her refrigerator. "You and I are cut from the same cloth, Penelope," she would say, squeezing my hand in hers. "We see the world as it is, not how we wish it to be." Her third-floor apartment in the historic Westbrook building downtown was my sanctuary throughout childhood. Built in 1947, it had the kind of character modern buildings lack: crown molding that told stories, hardwood floors that creaked with history, and windows that caught the light in ways that seemed magical. The building itself was a local landmark, with its red brick exterior and wrought iron balconies. When I was stressed from school or feeling invisible at home, I would spend weekends with Grandma baking in her kitchen with the vintage tiles and listening to her stories about the neighborhood when she first moved in as a young widow in the 1970s. During her final months as cancer slowly took her strength, I was the one who moved in to care for her. We would sit by the bay window overlooking the sycamore trees, and she would point out details about the apartment. That crack in the ceiling that appeared after the earthquake in '89. And see that stain on the hardwood? That's where I spilled red wine the night I found out your grandfather passed. One evening, as the sunset cast an orange glow across her living room, she held my hand tighter than usual. "Penelope, I want you to have this place when I'm gone," she said. "You're the only one who appreciates its history. Promise me you'll keep its spirit alive." I promised through tears, never questioning whether the arrangement would be formalized. In our family, words meant something, or so I thought. After Grandma passed, there was an unspoken understanding that I would move into the apartment. My parents even helped me pack up my rental. The apartment needed significant work. The plumbing was original to the building, and the electrical needed a complete overhaul to meet code. The kitchen appliances were from the early 1990s, and the bathroom fixtures had seen better days. "You should fix it up," my mother suggested. "Make it your own while honoring its history." It seemed like the perfect project. I had just received my year-end bonus, and while $10,000 was essentially my entire savings investing in a property that would eventually be mine, seemed logical. I created detailed plans, researched contractors specializing in historic renovations, and began the transformation. I spent weekends stripping 7 layers of wallpaper from the kitchen, discovering a beautiful pattern from the 1950s that I carefully preserved on one accent wall. I hired a plumber who replaced all the pipes while maintaining the character of the exposed fixtures. The electrician rewired everything to support modern appliances while keeping the vintage light fixtures that Grandma had lovingly maintained. The most significant expense was the kitchen. I selected appliances that had a vintage aesthetic but modern functionality. The original cabinets were refurbished rather than replaced, preserving the craftsmanship that had already lasted decades. The hardwood floors throughout were carefully refinished, revealing a warm patina that told the story of generations walking across them. What began as a renovation became a labor of love. Each repair or improvement was a conversation with my grandmother, a continuation of our relationship. I could feel her approval as I selected paint colors that complemented the original architecture, or when I decided to keep the quirky built-in bookcase that wasn't quite square but had character. By the time I was nearly finished, I had transformed the apartment into something that honored its past while looking toward the future. The process took 3 months of nights and weekends, countless trips to specialty hardware stores, and every penny of my $10 to $1,000 savings. But standing in the center of the living room, looking at how the afternoon light still caught the crystal doorknobs in exactly the way Grandma had shown me, I knew it was worth it. I was just days away from officially moving in. The only thing left was to sign the final paperwork transferring ownership, which my father had said he was handling through his firm's legal department. I planned a small housewarming gathering to show my family what I had accomplished and to share how I had honored Grandma's legacy. Little did I know that my labor of love was about to collide with my family's long-established patterns, and that the home I had poured my heart into was slipping through my fingers before I had even moved in. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. The patterns were there throughout my life, but I had normalized them. My brother Ryan was the golden child, and I was the reliable one who never needed attention. It wasn't that my parents didn't love me, they did, but they loved me in a way that took my stability for granted, while constantly rushing to rescue Ryan from his latest crisis. When we were teenagers, Ryan totaled his first car 3 months after getting his license. My parents replaced it immediately, explaining that he needs to get to football practice. When I saved for 2 years to buy my own car, their response was a simple nod and a casual, "That's our responsible Penelope." In college, Ryan changed majors 4 times and took 6 years to graduate. My parents covered every additional semester without complaint. When I graduated with honors and landed a competitive marketing position, my father's response was, "Well, we never worried about you." That phrase, "we never worried about you," became the backdrop of our relationship. It wasn't quite a compliment, more like an explanation for why my accomplishments received passing acknowledgement, while Ryan's smallest efforts were celebrated as monumental achievements. Ryan had a pattern with money that continued into adulthood. He would impulsively spend beyond his means, hit a financial wall, and then turn to our parents with wide eyes and empty pockets. They always came through often with a sigh and shake of the head that pretended disapproval, but actually masked an odd pride in being needed. I meanwhile built my career methodically. Starting as a marketing coordinator at a local agency, I worked my way up to executive level at a national firm by age 30. Each promotion or raise was met with the same lukewarm response from my family. "Well, you always were the smart one." The subtext was clear smart, but not the one who needed their attention. The apartment situation began to shift about 2 months into my renovations. Ryan had broken up with his girlfriend Amanda, who had been paying the majority of rent for their luxury downtown apartment. Suddenly, he was facing the reality of market-rate housing costs on his modest salary as a pharmaceutical sales rep, a job our father had secured through a golf buddy. "Ryan's having a tough time with this breakup," my mother mentioned during our weekly coffee date. "He really loved Amanda." What she didn't mention was that Amanda had discovered Ryan was cheating with his high school ex-girlfriend. I only knew because Amanda had called me directly, hoping I could help her retrieve some family heirlooms from their apartment that Ryan was now holding hostage, until she agreed to talk to him in person. A week later, my father casually asked about my renovation timeline over Sunday dinner. "How much longer before the place is livable?" he asked, not looking up from cutting his steak. "About 3 more weeks," I said, excited to share my progress. "I just need to finish the bathroom tile work and wait for the custom kitchen countertops to be installed. And all the major systems are updated plumbing electrical," he continued. I should have noticed the calculating tone, but instead I proudly detailed all the improvements I'd made. My father nodded, exchanging a quick glance with my mother that I didn't interpret until much later. The following week, my mother called to ask if Ryan could possibly store some furniture in the apartment's second bedroom, just temporarily, while he figured out his next move. "He's staying on Jason's couch right now, but he needs somewhere for his things," she explained. I hesitated. "The renovations aren't quite finished. There's dust everywhere, and the workers are still coming and going." "It would just be temporary," she pushed. "And maybe he could crash there for a night or two if Jason has company. You know how small his place is." Against my better judgment, I agreed to let Ryan store some items in the second bedroom. "But I'm not giving him a key," I clarified. "I'll let him in when I'm there working on the place." Ryan showed up with 4 suitcases and 6 large boxes. As I helped him carry them up, he surveyed the apartment with new interest. "Wow, you've really fixed this place up," he said, running his hand along the newly painted hallway. "It barely looks like Grandma's apartment anymore." Something in his tone felt off, almost territorial. He wandered through each room, commenting on changes in a way that felt less like appreciation and more like assessment. "You must have spent a fortune," he said, testing the new kitchen faucet. "Did Mom and Dad help you pay for all this?" "No," I said firmly. "This is my investment. Every penny came from my savings." He raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. I didn't realize you were so flush with cash these days." Over the next 2 weeks, Ryan found reasons to stop by almost daily. He would text last minute, asking to grab something from his stored belongings, but then linger for hours ordering delivery food and making himself comfortable. He began referring to the spare room as my room, in casual conversation. "I might have a date this Friday. Cool if I bring her back to my room here after." "It's not your room, Ryan," I corrected him. "You're storing some things here temporarily. I'm moving in next week." He shrugged as if my clarification was a technicality. "Right, but we're family, mi casa su casa, and all that." The tension built as my moving date approached. I had scheduled a small dinner at my parents' house the night before my official move-in planning, to show them photos of the completed renovations and invite them to a proper housewarming the following weekend. I wanted them to see how I had honored Grandma's legacy, while creating a space that was also distinctly mine. Little did I know that dinner would become the setting for a betrayal that would force me to reevaluate everything I thought I understood about my family and my place within it. The evening started normally enough. I arrived at my parents' Tudor-style home in the suburbs, carrying a photo album I'd created documenting the renovation process. My mother had prepared her signature pot roast, and the familiar smell of caramelized onions and herbs filled the house. "Penelope, right on time as always," my father said, kissing my cheek as I entered. He was dressed in his casual dinner attire khakis, and a button-down with the sleeves rolled up, looking every bit the successful suburban dad. "Your mother's just finishing up in the kitchen. Can I get you a glass of wine?" I accepted the glass of Cabernet and settled into the living room, placing my photo album on the coffee table. My mother emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Everything smells amazing, Mom," I said, standing to hug her. "Just the usual Sunday roast," she replied modestly, though we both knew she had been perfecting the recipe for decades. Ryan texted that he's running about 15 minutes late, something about traffic downtown. My father chuckled. That boy would be late to his own funeral. But we fell into easy conversation about my latest work project, a rebranding campaign for a national restaurant chain. My parents nodded politely as I explained the strategy that had won us the account, but I could tell their interest was superficial. Dad glanced at his watch twice during my explanation, and Mom kept finding reasons to return to the kitchen. "Enough about work," my mother finally interjected. "Tell us about the apartment. Are you all ready for the big move tomorrow?" This was my opening. I reached for the photo album, eager to show them the transformation. "It's better than I imagined," I said, opening to the first page, showing the before and after of the entryway. "I was able to restore the original hardwood floors throughout, and wait until you see what I discovered under the kitchen wallpaper." My father glanced at the photos with mild interest. "Looks expensive." "It was an investment," I acknowledged, "but worth every penny. The property value has definitely increased with the updates, and I've created a space that honors Grandma while being functional for modern living." My mother peered more closely at the kitchen renovation photos. "You kept the old cabinets. Wouldn't new ones have been more practical?" "The original cabinets are solid wood, Mom. They don't make them like that anymore. The carpenter was able to refinish them and add some modern hardware. They're actually a selling point for the building's historic character." Not that I had any intention of selling. This was my home, my connection to Grandma. The front door opened with a bang, and Ryan's voice boomed through the hallway. "Sorry I'm late, downtown was a nightmare." He strode into the living room with the confident air of someone who has never faced consequences for inconveniencing others. At 28, my brother still had the golden boy good looks that had made him popular in high school athletic build. Easy smile and a carefully casual appearance that actually took considerable effort to maintain. "Perfect timing," my mother said, standing up. "Dinner's ready to serve." Ryan clapped his hands together. Great, I'm starving. As we moved to the dining room, I noticed something odd about Ryan's demeanor. He seemed almost giddy, exchanging meaningful glances with my parents that created a knot in my stomach. There was a conspirator's energy between them that excluded me, despite my being physically present. The dinner itself was pleasant enough on the surface. We ate my mother's pot roast past the roasted vegetables and discussed neutral topics like an upcoming family wedding and the unusually warm spring weather. I tried several times to steer the conversation back to the apartment, but each attempt was redirected. When my mother brought out her apple crumble for dessert, my father cleared his throat in that intentional way that signaled an announcement was coming. I assumed it would be something routine, perhaps details about the paperwork I needed to sign for the apartment transfer, or plans for helping me move the next day. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys. Not just any keys, I recognized the vintage brass key to the apartment's front door, with the small red string Grandma had tied around it to distinguish it from her other keys. But instead of sliding the keys across the table to me, my father placed them in front of Ryan. "We've made a decision," he said, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he used when announcing family matters that weren't up for discussion. "We're giving the apartment to Ryan." The room seemed to tilt slightly, and the bite of apple crumble in my mouth turned to sand. I looked from my father to Ryan, who was already reaching for the keys with a poorly suppressed smile. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice calmer than I felt. My mother jumped in with practiced smoothness. "Well, with Amanda and Ryan breaking up and him needing a place to live, it just makes sense. The timing worked out perfectly with you finishing all those lovely renovations." "But Grandma wanted me to have the apartment," I said, still keeping my voice level. "And I've invested $10,000 of my own money in renovations based on that understanding." My father shifted slightly in his chair, the first tell that he wasn't as comfortable with this decision as he was pretending to be. "Your grandmother never officially updated her will, Penelope. The apartment is still technically part of the overall family estate that your mother and I are managing." "And Ryan needs it more right now," my mother added, as if that explained everything. "You have a great job, you can afford a nice place anywhere. Ryan is still getting established." Ryan twirled the keys around his finger. "Plus, I've always loved that old building. The location is perfect for me, right downtown, close to everything." "Close to the bars, you mean?" I said, the first edge creeping into my voice. Ryan shrugged, unbothered. "Among other things." I looked at each of their faces, searching for some recognition of what they were doing. There was none. In their minds, this was a perfectly reasonable family decision. The responsible daughter would understand and accept it, just as she had accepted every other instance where Ryan's needs trumped hers. A lifetime of swallowing disappointment had prepared me for this moment. Instead of the screaming match they perhaps subconsciously hoped for, which would allow them to label me as overreacting, I simply nodded slowly and took a deliberate bite of my dessert. Then, with the calm of someone discussing the weather, I said, "Then I suppose Ryan will be handling the 10,000 in repairs I've already paid for." There was a beat of silence, and then all three of them laughed. They actually laughed as if I'd made a joke. "Oh, Penelope," my mother said, wiping a non-existent tear from her eye. "You've always been so good with money. That's why we never worry about you." My father nodded in agreement. "Think of it as your contribution to helping your brother get back on his feet. Family helps family." Ryan added with a dismissive wave. "Besides, you would have spent money fixing up any place you moved into. You're so particular about everything." They had already constructed the narrative that absolved them of any obligation to compensate me. My investment was reframed as a character trait. Penelope is particular. Penelope is good with money. Penelope doesn't need our help. I finished my dessert in silence, the taste unregistered. When I finally spoke again, I chose my words carefully. "I see. Well, I should get going. I have some calls to make since my moving plans have obviously changed." As I stood to leave, my mother looked momentarily concerned. "You're not upset, are you, sweetie? We thought you'd understand." I gave her the smile I had perfected over years of family dynamics, pleasant, accommodating, revealing nothing of my inner thoughts. "It's just business, right? Ryan needs a place, and apparently my investment was a donation. I understand completely." I declined their offers to help clear the table, gathered my untouched photo album, and walked to my car with measured steps. It was only when I was safely inside with the doors locked that I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. As I started the engine, I caught a glimpse of my family through the dining room window. They were still seated at the table now, laughing about something else already moving on from what they considered a minor family matter successfully resolved. They had no idea what was coming. The drive home from my parents' house that night remains a blur in my memory. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, and I remember the hot tears that finally broke free once I was on the highway. But most clearly, I remember the moment I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment building. Not my grandmother's building, not the family's building, but my own ordinary apartment complex, where I would now be staying indefinitely. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, engine off, staring at nothing. The betrayal felt physical, like a blow to the chest that left me struggling for breath. Images flashed through my mind. Grandma holding my hand by the bay window promising me the apartment. My own hands carefully stripping decades of wallpaper. The pride I felt when the plumber praised my decision to preserve the original fixtures while updating the pipes. All of it, every moment and every dollar had just been handed to Ryan, as if I were nothing more than an unpaid contractor preparing the space for its rightful owner. When I finally made it inside my apartment, I collapsed onto my couch and let the tears flow freely. It wasn't just about the money, though. $10,000 was by no means a small sum. It was about what the apartment represented: my connection to Grandma, the one person in my family who had truly seen and valued me. It was about the future I had planned there, the home I had created with my own hands and vision. And most painfully, it was about the confirmation that in my family's eyes, my needs, dreams, and efforts would always be secondary to Ryan's. "Why am I surprised?" I whispered to my empty living room. "This has been the pattern our entire lives." The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. I couldn't face client meetings or strategy sessions when my personal world had just imploded. I spent the day alternating between numbness and waves of anger so intense they left me shaking. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from my parents and Ryan, all of which I ignored. "Hope you got home safe last night. Let us know if you need help finding a new place. Dad just sent you details about some available units in that new building on West Side. Much more modern than Grandma's old place. Ryan. Thanks for understanding about the apartment. You're the best sister ever. Can I get your advice on furniture? Thinking of replacing some of Grandma's old stuff." That last message nearly sent me into a rage. Not only had he taken the apartment I renovated, but now he was planning to discard Grandma's carefully chosen pieces that I had intentionally preserved and restored. For the next week, I went through the motions of my life in a fog. I went to work, delivered presentations, attended meetings, and then came home to stare at walls and ignore my family's increasingly frequent calls. Friends tried to check in, but I deflected their concerns with vague explanations about family issues I wasn't ready to discuss. Meanwhile, Ryan wasted no time moving into the apartment and making it his own in all the wrong ways. Through mutual friends and social media, I saw evidence of his immediate claim on the space I had poured my heart into. He posted photos with captions like "new bachelor pad upgrade" and "finally got a place worthy of hosting parties." One image showed him and his friends sitting on Grandma's restored vintage sofa beer bottles, precariously balanced on the antique coffee table I had carefully refinished. Another showed pizza boxes stacked on the new quartz countertops I had selected to complement the historic kitchen tiles. My friend Jessica finally broke through my isolation, showing up at my door with takeout and refusing to leave until I talked. "You look terrible," she said bluntly, pushing past me into my apartment. "What's going on? And don't say nothing because I've known you too long to buy that." Over Thai food I barely tasted, I finally shared the whole story. Jessica's expression shifted from concern to outrage as I detailed the dinner ambush and my family's dismissive attitude toward my $10,000 investment. "That's not just unfair, Penelope, it's potentially illegal," she said when I finished. "You should talk to a lawyer. They can't just take your investment like that." "Can't they?" I asked wearily. There was no formal agreement, nothing in writing. I was operating on trust and my grandmother's verbal promise. Still, there must be some recourse. What about small claims court? I shook my head. The maximum claim in small claims is $5,000 in our state. And honestly, Jess, I don't know if I have the energy to fight my entire family. That's exactly what they were counting on, Jessica said fiercely. That you'll be the reasonable one again and just absorb the loss. When are you going to stop letting them treat you this way? Her words stung because they held truth. I wasn't ready to face. I had spent my entire life being the reasonable one, the one who didn't make waves, the one who understood when plans changed to accommodate Ryan's latest crisis. After Jessica left, I spent hours researching my legal options. Without a formal agreement or updated will from my grandmother, my position was weak. I could potentially make a case for the value I had added to the property through improvements, but the process would be lengthy, expensive, and would permanently damage my relationship with my family. As I weighed my options, my brother made the decision easier through his predictable irresponsibility. 2 weeks after moving in, Ryan hosted a large party at the apartment. Through social media posts, I watched in horror as dozens of people crowded into the space, drinks sloshing dangerously close to the original hardwood floors I had so carefully restored. The next morning, a mutual friend texted me, "Thought you should know someone broke the vintage mirror in the entryway at Ryan's party last night, and there's water damage in the bathroom from some plumbing issue." That was the breaking point. The mirror had been my grandmother's prized possession, a family heirloom she had brought from her childhood home. And the plumbing issue was undoubtedly related to the delicate balance required for the updated system I had installed, which Ryan had clearly not bothered to understand. It was time to stop being reasonable. It was time to stand up not just for my financial investment, but for my worth in this family dynamic that had taken advantage of me for the last time. The revelation that Ryan had damaged not just any mirror, but Grandma's treasured heirloom was the catalyst I needed. Something shifted inside me, a lifetime of accommodating and understanding, suddenly hardened into resolve. This wasn't about being petty or vindictive. This was about establishing boundaries that should have existed long ago. Monday morning, I made 3 important calls. The first was to Marina Levinson, a financial advisor who had helped me plan my investment strategy over the years. "Penelope, based on what you're telling me, this is more than a family dispute," Marina said after hearing my story. "This is about protecting your financial interests. I recommend documenting everything and consulting with a lawyer who specializes in property and family law." My second call was to James Whitaker, an attorney friend who had helped me review my employment contract when I took my current position. "Without a formal agreement, it gets complicated," James confirmed after I explained the situation. "But that doesn't mean you have no recourse. What you're describing is an implied contract based on your family's knowledge of your investment and their tacit approval. The fact that they let you spend your own money improving a property with the understanding it would be yours creates an obligation they can't just ignore." The third call was to my mentor, Eleanor Hastings, the former CMO at my company, who had taken me under her wing years ago. Eleanor had navigated plenty of difficult professional situations and had become my trusted advisor for personal matters as well. "This isn't just about the apartment or the money," Eleanor said sagely. "This is about how you allow your family to treat you. If you don't establish consequences now, this pattern will continue indefinitely." Armed with their advice, I spent the next week meticulously documenting every penny I had invested in the apartment. I gathered before and after photos, collected all receipts for materials and labor, and created a detailed spreadsheet breaking down costs by category: plumbing, electrical, flooring, kitchen, bathroom, and cosmetic improvements. I even calculated the hours of my own labor at a fair market rate, though I knew that would be harder to recoup. The total came to $10,876.42, more than I had initially estimated. Seeing the number in black and white reinforced the magnitude of what had been taken from me. With James's help, I drafted a formal invoice addressed to my parents and Ryan jointly. The document was professional, detailed, and unmistakably serious. There was no emotional language, no accusations, just a clear accounting of the value I had added to their property and an expectation of compensation. James also helped me draft a letter explaining that if payment wasn't received within 30 days, I would be pursuing legal remedies, including potentially placing a mechanic's lien on the property, for the improvements I had made as an unlicensed contractor. "You probably won't need to go that far," James advised, "but they need to understand you're serious." Eleanor coached me through how to deliver this message in person. "You need to approach this as you would a business negotiation," she counseled. "No emotion, no family dynamics, just facts and consequences. And most importantly, you need to be prepared to follow through." The following Sunday, I arrived unannounced at my parents' weekly family dinner. I knew Ryan would be there. He never missed a free meal, especially one prepared by our mother. Walking up the familiar path to their front door, I felt none of the anxiety or anger I had expected. Instead, I felt oddly calm, centered by the knowledge that I was finally advocating for myself. My mother opened the door, surprise registering on her face. "Penelope, we weren't expecting you. You haven't returned our calls." "I know," I said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I needed some time to process things. Is dinner ready?" "It smells wonderful." Momentarily flustered by my uncharacteristic directness, my mother simply nodded. "We were just about to sit down." My father and Ryan were already at the table plates, half filled with my mother's Sunday pot roast. Their expressions when they saw me were a study in contrast. My father's face showed a flicker of guilt, quickly masked by his usual authoritative demeanor, while Ryan's registered brief alarm before settling into his typical easy smile. "Well, look who decided to join us," Ryan said, raising his wine glass in mock toast. "The prodigal sister returns." I took my usual seat at the table and placed my portfolio on the table beside me. "Thank you for saving me a place." An awkward silence fell as my mother hurried to set an extra place and serve me food. No one quite knew how to proceed, clearly thrown by my calm demeanor after 2 weeks of silence. My father finally broke the tension. "We've been worried about you, Penelope. It's not like you to ignore our calls." I needed time to assess the situation properly, I replied, taking a small bite of pot roast. "This is delicious, Mom, as always." More uncomfortable silence followed as we ate. I could feel them exchanging glances, trying to gauge my mood and purpose. When dessert was served, apple crisp ironically, the same dessert from the night of their betrayal, I finally reached for my portfolio. "I've brought something I'd like to discuss with all of you," I said, opening the folder and removing 3 copies of my detailed invoice. I slid 1 copy to each of them and waited as they registered what they were seeing. "What is this?" my father asked, frowning as he scanned the document. "This is an itemized invoice for all improvements made to Grandma's apartment," I explained calmly. "As you can see, the total investment was $10,876.42, which includes materials, contracted labor, and a very conservative estimate of my own labor hours." Ryan snorted. "You're billing us seriously." "Yes, Ryan, I am. When you move into a newly renovated apartment that someone else has paid to update, that's how it works. You either did the work yourself or you compensate the person who did." My mother looked distressed. "Penelope, we discussed this. We thought you understood that your contribution was a family matter." "I understood that you expected me to absorb a significant financial loss for Ryan's benefit, yes. I no longer find that acceptable." My father's face had reddened slightly. "This is ridiculous. We're family, not business associates." "That's interesting," I replied, maintaining my composure. "When you decided to give Ryan the apartment that Grandma promised to me, you said it was just business. I'm simply responding in kind." Ryan leaned back in his chair, the cocky smile still in place but slightly strained around the edges. "I can't afford to pay you 10 grand. I just started getting back on my feet after the breakup with Amanda." "I'm aware of your financial situation, Ryan. That's why the invoice is addressed to all 3 of you jointly. You can determine among yourselves how to handle the payment." My father's expression shifted from anger to negotiation mode, a look I recognized from when he discussed difficult clients from his accounting practice. "Penelope, be reasonable. The apartment is family property. Yes, you put work into it, but ultimately it was never legally yours." "That's correct," I acknowledged, "which is why I'm not claiming ownership. I'm simply requesting compensation for services rendered and materials provided. As I'm sure you're aware, Dad, if I were to place a mechanic's lien on the property for unpaid improvements, it would complicate any future sale or refinancing efforts." The mention of a mechanic's lien caused my father's eyebrows to shoot up. He had clearly not anticipated that I would have researched legal remedies. "You wouldn't go that far," he said, but his tone held a new note of uncertainty. "I prefer not to," I agreed, "which is why I'm proposing a simple solution: compensate me for my investment, and we can put this unfortunate situation behind us." I closed my portfolio and stood up. The invoice includes my payment details and a 30-day time frame for resolution. I've also included my lawyer's contact information should you have any questions about the legal basis for my claim. My mother looked close to tears. "Penelope, please, we don't want this to become adversarial." "Neither do I, Mom. This isn't about punishment. It's about fairness. I've valued being part of this family my entire life, often at the expense of my own needs. But I can no longer participate in a dynamic where my contributions are taken for granted, while Ryan's needs always come first." Ryan's smirk had finally faded, replaced by a look of genuine concern. "You're serious about this?" "Completely," I confirmed. "Thank you for dinner, Mom. It was delicious as always." I walked out of their house with my head high, leaving them sitting in stunned silence around the dining table. For the first time in my adult life, I had set a boundary with my family and stood firm in my own worth. Whatever happened next, I had taken the first step toward changing a pattern that had defined our relationships for far too long. As I drove away, I felt neither vindictive satisfaction nor anxiety about their response. Instead, I experienced something I hadn't felt since before the apartment debacle: a sense of peace that comes from honoring your own value in the world. The fallout from my Sunday dinner ultimatum was swift, but not entirely unexpected. My phone exploded with messages within an hour of my departure from my parents' house. The progression was almost comical in its predictability, denial, anger bargaining, with a noticeable absence of acceptance. From my father: "This is completely unreasonable, Penelope. We need to discuss this like adults, not through invoices and legal threats." From my mother: "I don't understand why you're making this so difficult. We're just trying to help your brother. Why can't you see that?" From Ryan: "Seriously, you're going to ruin my fresh start over money. I thought family meant more to you than that." I didn't respond to any of them, following James's advice to let the initial emotional reactions play out without engagement. "Give them time to realize you're serious," he had counseled. "Right now they're reacting to having their comfortable dynamic challenged. That was always going to be uncomfortable." 3 days after our confrontation, the first real consequence of my stance materialized. Ryan called me at work, his voice lacking its usual casual confidence. "Pen, we need to talk about the apartment," he said, an edge of panic evident in his tone. "The hot water heater is making this weird noise, and now there's no hot water. I have a date coming over tonight. What do I do?" "That sounds challenging," I replied neutrally. "Have you called a plumber?" "A plumber, on short notice. Do you know how much that would cost?" "I do, actually. I paid $1,680 to update the entire system. His information should be in the maintenance binder I left in the kitchen drawer." "Maintenance binder? What maintenance binder?" I closed my eyes briefly. Of course he hadn't bothered to look for information about caring for the apartment. "Bottom drawer to the left of the sink. Blue 3-ring binder labeled apartment information. All service providers' contact details are in the first section." "Can't you just come over and look at it? You know how this stuff works?" "I'm afraid I can't. I have client meetings all afternoon and plans this evening." There was a pause. Then Ryan's voice took on the wheedling tone that had always worked on our parents. "Come on, Pen, don't be like this. I need your help." "What you need is a plumber. Good luck with your date." I ended the call before he could respond, a small but significant act of liberation from my usual role as Ryan's backup plan. Similar calls followed over the next 2 weeks. My parents reached out about the property tax bill that had arrived, apparently higher than they anticipated, due to the increased property value resulting from my renovations. Ryan called again, when a contractor who had worked on the bathroom tile work contacted him directly about a follow-up maintenance plan we had discussed. My mother called in tears when Ryan reported that the vintage chandelier in the dining room was flickering, the same chandelier I had carefully rewired to preserve its character while ensuring safety. Each time I maintained the same boundary: polite but firm redirection to professional services, with a gentle reminder about the outstanding invoice. 18 days after I had delivered my ultimatum, my father requested we meet for coffee. I suggested a cafe downtown, deliberately choosing neutral territory rather than his office or my parents' home. He arrived looking uncharacteristically uncertain, the confident accountant demeanor replaced by something more tentative. After ordering our drinks, he cleared his throat and placed a folder on the table between us. "Your mother and I have been discussing your invoice." He began, his tone carefully measured. "While we still feel the approach was unnecessarily adversarial, given our family relationship, we recognize that you did invest significantly in the apartment." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue, rather than jumping to fill the uncomfortable pause as I might have done in the past. "The truth is," he continued, opening the folder to reveal several spreadsheets, "we didn't fully understand the scope of what you had done to the place. When we made the decision about Ryan, we thought you had just done some cosmetic updates, paint, maybe some new fixtures. We didn't realize—" "You didn't ask," I said quietly. "You saw what you wanted to see." He nodded slowly. "That's fair. After reviewing your detailed invoice and consulting with a contractor friend about current rates, we believe your assessment of the value added to the property is actually conservative." This was unexpected. I had braced myself for haggling, for attempts to diminish the value of my work. "Ryan is in over his head," my father admitted. "The maintenance costs alone are more than he anticipated, not to mention the property taxes and insurance. He called us in a panic when he got the insurance bill last week." A small petty part of me wanted to say "I told you so," but I resisted. This wasn't about winning. It was about establishing respect. "What are you proposing?" I asked instead. "We'd like to call a family meeting to discuss options. Your mother and I are prepared to reimburse you in full for your investment, but we need to reconsider the overall arrangement with Ryan and the apartment." I considered his offer carefully. "I'm open to a family meeting, but I'd like to bring someone with me." My father frowned slightly. "Your lawyer, Penelope, we're trying to keep this within the family." "Not my lawyer. A friend who can provide objective perspective." After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "That seems reasonable. Saturday evening at the house, your mother wants to cook, says it might help ease tensions." I agreed, and as we parted ways, I noticed something had shifted in how my father looked at me. A new awareness, perhaps even respect, that hadn't been there before. The family meeting that Saturday was unlike any gathering we'd had before. I arrived with Eleanor, whose distinguished silver hair and calm, authoritative presence immediately changed the dynamic in the room. My parents were on their best behavior, clearly trying to impress this accomplished stranger. Ryan was uncharacteristically subdued, avoiding direct eye contact with me. "I've asked Eleanor to join us because she has experience mediating complex negotiations," I explained as we gathered in the living room rather than the dining room, another break from tradition that signaled this wasn't a normal family dinner. My father had prepared a presentation of sorts with printed financial statements and a clear agenda. "We've reviewed the situation carefully," he began, "and have come to several conclusions." He outlined the facts with surprising candor. The apartment maintenance was more involved than they had realized. Ryan's financial situation wasn't stable enough to handle the responsibilities of homeownership. And most significantly, they had failed to consider the ethical implications of allowing me to invest substantial personal funds in a property they intended to redirect to Ryan. "Our proposal is threefold," my father concluded. "First, we will reimburse Penelope in full, with interest, for all documented improvements to the apartment. Second, we believe the most equitable solution is to sell the property and divide the proceeds fairly among all parties. And third, we acknowledge that our handling of this situation damaged trust within our family, particularly with Penelope, and we are committed to rebuilding that trust." I glanced at Eleanor, who gave me a subtle nod of approval. The proposal was fair, even generous. But more important than the financial resolution was the acknowledgement of the broken trust and commitment to change. Ryan spoke up for the first time, his usual bravado noticeably absent. "I should also say that I didn't appreciate what went into making that apartment so nice. I've been taking financial responsibility courses at the community center. And one thing we've talked about is understanding the true cost of things. I didn't get that before." It wasn't a direct apology, but from Ryan, this level of self-awareness represented significant growth. The discussion that followed was more honest than any conversation our family had ever had. We talked about patterns that had been established in our childhood, my parents' tendency to overcompensate for Ryan's struggles, my habit of suppressing my needs to maintain family harmony, and Ryan's expectation that others would always clean up his messes. By the end of the evening, we had a written agreement about the apartment, a timeline for the reimbursement, and something far more valuable, the beginning of a new family dynamic, based on mutual respect rather than entrenched roles. As Eleanor and I drove away, she squeezed my hand. "You know what the most important outcome was today?" "What's that?" "They saw you. Maybe for the first time they truly saw you." It's been 6 months since that pivotal family meeting, and I'm sitting on the balcony of my new condo watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The property is entirely mine, purchased with my portion of the proceeds from selling Grandma's apartment plus the reimbursement for my renovations. Unlike the vintage charm of the old building, my condo is sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows and clean lines, a fresh start, unburdened by family history. The sale of the apartment went smoothly once we all agreed it was the best solution. It sold quickly, and for well above market value, thanks largely to the renovations I had completed. The real estate agent specifically highlighted the thoughtful preservation of historic elements balanced with modern updates, in the listing validating the approach I had taken. My parents kept their word, reimbursing me fully before the sale was even complete. More surprisingly, they maintained their commitment to rebuilding our relationship on healthier terms. Our weekly family dinners resumed, but with subtle differences that reflected our new dynamic. My professional accomplishments received genuine interest and recognition. My opinions on family matters were solicited and respected. Small changes, perhaps, but meaningful ones. Ryan's transformation has been the most unexpected. The financial responsibility course he mentioned was just the beginning. After the apartment sold, he found a modest rental within his budget and has been living independently without financial bailouts from our parents for the first time in his adult life. He recently called me for advice about starting an emergency savings fund, a concept that would have been foreign to him just months ago. "I finally get why you were always so careful with money," he told me during a rare brother-sister lunch. "It's not just about having things, it's about security and choices." As for Grandma's memory, I found ways to honor her that didn't depend on possessing her apartment. I framed several photos of us together, including one taken in her beloved bay window seat. The crystal doorknobs from the apartment, which the new owners were replacing anyway, now serve as unique bookends in my home office. And her recipe box, which my mother had stored away, now sits proudly on my kitchen counter, a weekly ritual of cooking one of her dishes, keeping her wisdom and care alive in my life. The most profound change, however, has been within myself. Standing up to my family taught me that advocating for my worth doesn't mean losing connection. In fact, it created the possibility for more authentic relationships. I no longer feel the need to be the perpetually understanding daughter and sister who puts everyone else's needs before her own. I've learned that healthy boundaries aren't selfish. They're necessary for genuine intimacy. When I look back at that dinner where my father passed the keys to Ryan, I no longer feel the sting of betrayal. Instead, I see it as the catalyst that forced a long overdue reckoning in our family system. Without that moment, we might have continued indefinitely in our dysfunctional patterns, with resentment building beneath a veneer of harmony. My grandmother once told me that the most valuable things we own are not possessions, but the courage to live authentically. At the time, I thought she was referring to her decision to live independently after my grandfather's death against the advice of friends who thought a widow should move in with family. Now I understand she was sharing a philosophy that had taken her decades to develop, one that I needed to discover through my own journey. The apartment was never really about the physical space. It was about being seen, valued, and respected. In losing the apartment but finding my voice, I gained something far more precious than real estate. Tonight, as I prepare to host my own housewarming in my new space, I feel Grandma's presence more strongly than I ever did in her old apartment. I imagine her nodding with approval as I arrange flowers in the vase she gave me for my 21st birthday, her voice whispering, "You see, Penelope, you found your way just as I knew you would." The doorbell rings, announcing my first guests. As I move to answer it, I catch my reflection in the hallway mirror, shoulders back, eyes bright, the posture of someone who knows her own worth. This is the true inheritance my grandmother left me, not an apartment, but the example of a woman who understood her value and lived accordingly. In the end, the keys my father handed to Ryan that night unlocked something unexpected, my own power to reshape family patterns that no longer served any of us. And that has made all the difference. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself with family? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are with the people we love most. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about navigating complicated family dynamics. Thank you for listening, and remember, knowing your worth isn't selfish. It's how we build truly loving relationships that can withstand life's challenges.